Well, I got all kinds of toys here with me today. It means I didn't get it all in one place. But I've been studying a lot these days and trying to learn and listen because when I listen to the news, I feel like Rev Tevye. Anybody watch the movie Fiddler on the Roof ever? Remember Rev Tevye? Yeah, good old guy. I like the way he sang. He's a good old guy, man. He had the power to sing and people would present, I forget what the deal was. Somebody present an idea and he goes, you're right. And another person spoke up and says, you're right too. He gave the opposite view. And then this young guy comes and he says, he's right and he's right. They both can't be right. And Reb Tevye says, you're right too. That's the way I feel sometimes. I hear the news, put on another channel, I hear it another way. Whoa, you go, man, seems like everybody's right, doesn't it? That's the way I feel. Anyway, this is a story about, I like, this is supposed to be Shame Smasher. Shame Smasher. But I like that Shame Smash too. It's like in the past, right? Shame should be smashed. And shame is such a powerful thing. I should have turned on this computer a little ahead of time. But my question is, where do I begin? Where do I begin with this thing? Because I've got all kinds of notes here. But since we started with Mephibosheth, who was lame in both feet, that word in Hebrew is really harsh. He was struck. And normally in those days when somebody is struck, who did the striking? God got the blame. And if something happened, just like I was a Romanian friend called me up. We were classmates in the seminary. And let me get this thing going here. I just went there for a summer. I went to the seminary for a summer. This pastor in Bellevue, Miss Pastor Viemeister, said, yeah, you should check out the seminary. So I sent in my application. They accepted me. I said, okay, I'll go there for a summer. Ended up staying 3 years. And halfway through the summer session, I was like, what am I doing here? All these books. I'm an art major. I can't read. This is just, too much stuff going around my head. It was like too much. So Pastor, oh boy, I can't remember this guy's name. He was a Lutheran guy who had became a Seventh-day Adventist. Got a couple of his books by his husband, my bad, his wife in our house. Oh, Stranger in the Home. Holmes, Pastor Holmes. Can't remember his first name. He said, well, pray. If God wants you to stay, ask him to provide the way. Because I said, I don't know what I'm doing here. It's crazy. So anyway, I prayed, and a couple weeks later, I was in the dorm. I stayed in the dorm that summer. And I heard this knock on the door. I go to my dorm room, and it was pretty empty in the summer there. And what happened? I got to open this thing up. Okay. Oh no, this is going to be online. Don't tell me I saved this online. Hang on a second here. So I open up the door, and there's this guy sitting in his wheelchair there. Hey, how's it going? I said, oh, what's going on? And I'll see if it opens. Oh, come on. It did. Okay. Okay, so I open the door. Hey, what's going on there? He goes, yeah, my roommate is out of town, and everybody else is gone. And I wet my pants. I need somebody to change me. You think you could help me? Not on all those tests in high school, career and all that stuff. Nurse was like the lowest on my list. And that was not something I was interested in at all. And I said, well, I've changed my pants. I suppose I can change your pants, right? So God, it showed me how to put them in the shower and all this stuff. And anyway, I did it. So a couple of weeks later, he says, hey, my roommate is moving on, so I'm looking for a new roommate. Would you like to take care of me? Government will give you a whole $300 a month, and you don't have to pay any rent. I said, well, sure. Let's do it. So I did it. It was a really good experience. I learned about, I think I learned, that helped prepare me to be a father. Like changing diapers and stuff like that was just not my deal. And I never had to really change any big messes, if you know what I mean. It was a really crazy experience. So one Sunday, one Sabbath, excuse me, I was going to go to church. It was like 0 degrees out. It was our coldest day of the year. It's not cold in Michigan like Minnesota. You know, it's like near the lake. They have that warm lake effect. So southwest corner of Michigan is not cold. Actually, further south where North Bend, Indiana is, that's much colder. So anyway, but Gary was coughing that day. He was coughing. And I said, I better just stay here and watch. And about 11:15, he goes, take me to the hospital. Take me to the hospital. I can't breathe. And so we got him to the hospital. And, you know, the doctors came. They checked his blood, and they said he's got 30 minutes to live. His oxygen level's really low. And like 10 minutes later, they checked his blood oxygen level again. He's got like 5 minutes. He's gone. And so we're all praying there, and Pastor Rand, he was the chaplain of the university, he was there, and we're praying, and you'd see his eyes roll back in his head, and woo, and every couple minutes he'd be fine, and all of a sudden it looked like he was going. And all of a sudden 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes went by, 10 minutes went by, and he says, maybe I'm going to live. And his mom had prayed. She said, can't we just pray for him to die? Because she had already lost 2 sons. And, you know, this prolonging life that was going on. He was like the oldest guy in Michigan with a muscular dystrophy. So, yeah, it's tough, you know. And she wasn't a Christian at the time. And several years later, I saw her on, what was that guy's name? President of the North American Division. Pastor Don Schneider had a program on Hope Channel. And she was there giving her testimony. So it was really neat being a part of that experience and living with a boy who, of course, and everybody, evangelical Christians especially, who met him, they wanted to see him rise out of that chair, right? That's what everybody wanted to do, see him rise out of that chair. And when it doesn't happen, what's wrong? Somebody doesn't have faith. But Jesus said, greater works will you do than I do. And you know what what's a greater work? Making someone rise out of their bed and walk, or having to take care of them for 50 years? Taking care of someone for 50 years is a greater work, if you ask me. Living with suffering is a greater work. And this is not an easy world to live in. And especially if we go through trauma. And this guy's mom went through 7 husbands. Gary's mom went through 7 husbands. One said, I'll marry you, but I will not have anything to do with those boys, because all 3 boys had muscular dystrophy. So living in a world like that is pretty hard. There's a lot of shame that goes on, and there's a lot of shame that gets tossed around these days. The last couple of weeks, you know, you start listening to things on YouTube, the computer says, oh, you like that? Here's another one for you. And pretty soon you got, you know, I was listening to these different views on the war going on over there. And all of a sudden, well, they realize you're a Christian or something. Pretty soon there's a Bible conference. Bethlehem, what's it called? Bethlehem Bible College. Well, that's a nice place to go visit, right? I wouldn't mind going and studying there. And this pastor from England, he did his doctoral dissertation on Christian Zionism. So I said, oh, this has got to be good. And it was good. And then more talks come up. And Brother Andrew, I don't know if you know about Brother Andrew. He's like a Danish guy. He died a few years back at the age of 96. He spent most of his life just going through the countrysides and smuggling Bibles, and spent 15 years in some prison in one of those countries for smuggling Bibles. I don't know which church he belonged to, but you know, he had a lot of courage to be able to do something like that. Anyway, so I started listening to these guys, and sure enough, I said, well, I got to investigate this stuff. What's going on with where did this Christian Zionism come from? I was pretty sure I knew. And Zionism is the support of the nation of Israel, basically. And I was studying the political side and all that. I said, where did this interest come from? Why are people so interested in this? Listen to one person this week. Listen to the guy. You will be shocked to hear this pastor. He's Pastor Greg Locke. You might have heard of him during the pandemic when he refused to close down his church. Then he refused to let people in there who wore masks. And then he was speaking about the election being robbed, which we've heard a lot about. Well, here's what he says about the war going on over there today. Tell me, is he a shame smasher? Or the Bible has another word, a shame maker. It's in Greek, I mean Hebrew, Old Testament, a shame maker. They don't translate it that way normally, but listen to what he said. Israel should make, this is Christian pastors, Israel should make the Gaza Strip a parking lot by this time next week. I hope Netanyahu, which means given by God, his name is gift of God or given by God, Netanyahu mows the whole thing down by this time next week. Islam is a satanic death call, and they would cut off your head before I said amen in this sermon, if they had the chance. They should also get a missile and blow that wicked dome off the rock, plumb off the spot where it is, so we can get that third temple rebuilt and usher in the coming of Jesus. Pastor Greg Locke. Now, those aren't what I call words of love, especially if you want to win over Muslims. Bad theology, unfortunately, leads to bad practices and a bad attitude towards others and hate. We had some Palestinian boys got shot a week or so ago and in this country. And we also have had some attacks on Jews this week, all because of interesting ideas. So, we've known for a long time the evangelicals are pushing that God is the special people and the temple has to be rebuilt in Jerusalem for Jesus to come back. Have you heard any of that? Yeah, of course. So anyway, shortly after the death of Martin Luther, people started reading the Bible and they said, what about the Jews? Well, Martin Luther, he was reaching out to the Jews early on in his ministry, but they were kind of stubborn people. And then he wrote a whole book against them and basically condemned them all to hell. And Hitler ran in that book. He said, hey, that's a pretty nice book, Did you know that in where our college is located in Germany, 97% of our members voted for Hitler? Recently, probably since the year 2000 is now recently for me. Our church asked for forgiveness over there. How could we support such a man as Adolf Hitler? At the same time, over in France, there were descendants of the Huguenots in southern France. And they would take in these Jews. They saved like 5,000 Jewish children. Well, they knew what it meant to be persecuted. They're the French Huguenots, the French Protestants. Many were put to death. And others moved to the mountains in southern France where the soil was no good, and obviously wasn't very many people. And they established a church and a college and everything. And when the news came out of what was going on in Paris, the soldiers coming into Jewish houses, taking men and women away and send them off to Germany, they started receiving these people. And their pastor, André Trocmé, said, we ignore what is a Jew. We only know what are human beings. Even if I possess such a list, they asked him in court. He was taken away to jail. He said, even if I had a list of the people, I would not furnish it to you. These people came to seek aid and refuge among the Protestants in this region. I am their pastor. In other words, their shepherd. It is not the role of the shepherd to turn over the sheep placed in his care. Oh, he's got so many good quotes. I had my kids listen to a talk by his daughter. And his daughter, imagine that, he was 89 when she gave it in Western Washington University about her town in France. She lives in St. Paul, Minnesota. She's 96 years. She looks still sharp today. And there's a book that was written that she helped them write, this author write, We Only Know Men. The Rescue of the Jews from France. And let me see if I can find one more. Let me see, where'd that guy go? That's good enough. Anyway, there's something like the movement of kindness or something is what they called their town, the movement of kindness. So where did this idea come that the temple had to be rebuilt? I'm going to review Adventism really quickly here. In the year 1831, the Millerite movement was born. William Miller had written his first document about the 2300 days in 1822. And 1831, that was the start of the movement. He first shared his public belief that year. At the same time, in 1831, it was the first meeting of the Plymouth Brethren in England, out of which became known the movement of dispensationalism. And John Darby, the biggest name in that movement, was their main speaker, who promoted this idea that the Jews are going to be saved by keeping the law, and Christians are going to be saved by grace. Okay? We Adventists believe that there is one covenant. It was a covenant through Abraham. The Jews slipped into a legalistic covenant. All you say we will do. And they thought they were going to be saved by that. But Abraham's covenant was a covenant of faith and trusting in a Savior for his salvation. That was the first covenant. And it was later called the New Covenant. So anyway, back to William Miller. He started preaching, and at the same time, same date, 1831, the brethren in England, Plymouth Brethren, started preaching about the end of times. One of the key figures in our movement, the Adventist movement, was Joshua Himes, who started a journal called The Signs of the Times. And Millerite preachers started preaching over in Great Britain in 1841, and they connected up with these Plymouth Brethren, and it was all considered a part of the same movement. But there started to be differences that started coming about. In 1841, let me see. Let me see. Oh, here we go. So, by 1841, let me see. Literature by 1844 had reached Great Britain. 5 million copies had been distributed through Pastor Himes' movement and his Signs of the Times. Unfortunately, Millerism split in 18 different movements, and one of those was the Seventh-day Adventist Church, which believed in premillennialism. That means, what is premillennialism? Jesus comes back before the millennial, right? Before the 1,000 years. These other ones believe that Jesus was coming back, but also, there was going to be 1,000 years of peace, and then Jesus was going to come back. So 1,000 years of peace, and of course, during that reign of peace, the Jewish temple would be rebuilt. So about this time, a young lady had joined this movement, and she wrote a book called Early Writings, and she stated, I saw that old Jerusalem never would be built up. And so far, is there a temple in Jerusalem? Not yet. So I wonder, we don't know. Is she referring that the temple itself would never be rebuilt? Obviously, she was around when the Jews had been moving back there. And we'll get that because she died in 1915, and it seemed like it was being rebuilt. So it doesn't, at this point, back in the early, 1860s or 50s, when she said, I saw that old Jerusalem never would be rebuilt. So anyway, the first Adventist Great General Conference happened in Boston in 1840. And of course, the literalists of England insisted, they showed up too, but they insisted on the Old Testament messianic prophecies had to be literally fulfilled. And the kingdom of God would be restored, and Christ and the resurrected saints would include Jewish Palestine as a capital of Jerusalem, and there would be a literal temple. The Millerites consider them brethren, and Seventh-day Adventists believe they're part of the Great Adventist Awakening, and a part of the first angel message. But in 1840, the interchange was broken between these two groups. The doctrine of the millennium was the problem. It was doomed to failure, Adventists in the United States said, to win the literalists. That's what they call them. And Ellen and James White spoke of unity after that, of before the disappointment, and that distracting views started springing up afterwards. And how were we going to be united as a group of believers? It was in the third angel's message. That's what made the difference. So what does that third angel's message say? Let's look in Revelation chapter 18, verse 1. Revelation 18, verse 1. In this Revelation 18, verse 1. Bible's hard to move the pages. Actually, this is not the third angel's message. I'm sorry. But this is the verse also refers to the same thing. It says, after this I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was made bright with his glory. Do you remember last time I spoke about glory of God? Anybody remember that from Exodus chapter 34? Moses said, let me see your glory. I want to see what's important for you. I want to see what's heavy for you. What is the most important matter of the day? And God says what? The Lord, merciful, what else? Long-suffering, goodness, full of grace and truth. And the word that was repeated in that verse was the word hesed, which has been translated many ways, but some people say it's untranslatable. But goodness, kindness, any positive attribute, those attributes belong to God. And this is the message that is to fill the world with its glory. Listen to what it says again. The angel came down from heaven, that's a messenger, having great authority, and the earth was made bright with his glory. So glory, there's that word again. What is most important? Now these days, Christianity is really losing a punch, really losing authority especially among the non-believers in this country because of what's going on. People can see the one-sided thing. Palestinian Christians have sent out a plea to American Christians, please, don't forget us. We're people. And we have been mistreated for a long time. And please, there were Palestinian Christians in Gaza hiding in the Orthodox Church, which was bombed. This verse says it had great authority, and authority is influence. Right now, it seems like the Christian church, especially in more secular areas like Washington, is losing influence, losing authority. What do you have to tell us? So, let me see, where am I at here? So, as back on the other side of the pond, Adventism kept growing until the Great Disappointment. In 1840, Lord Ashley, who was an ardent literalist, prodded Lord Palmerston, his stepfather-in-law, who was a British Foreign Secretary, to help restore Israel to Palestine. This is in 1840. And so he knew he couldn't use religious reasons, so he came up with political, financial, and commercial reasons why the Jews needed to go back to their land, the promised land. Of course, the Jews didn't want to move anywhere. He got, the government started moving. They put a consulate in Jerusalem in 1838, and they got permission from the Sultan of Turkey to build an Anglican church there. And their hope was that Jewish people would convert and they would move back to Israel. Of course, it didn't happen. But this sparked an evangelical craze for the conversion of Jews, and it created a proprietary feeling among Palestine. And even the mid-1800s, British people were speaking about Palestine as the British annex, the British annex. Can you imagine that? 1848 came, the story of France and England was all about empire building, right? In 1848, there were political upheavals all across Europe. In Italy, that's the year that the Waldensian Christians finally had the right to worship without the fear of being put to death, 1848. Adventists called this the shaking of the powers in heaven, the time of the Gentiles and restoration. Josiah Litch started writing about this in Signs of the Times. And a Jewish man, a journalist in New York City, Mordecai Noah, wrote to the Sultan of Turkey and asked for permission to build a synagogue, and he got that permission. And it was a foreshadowing of the promises of greater things. Newspapers started pointing to the rebuilding of the Jewish temple. What year was this? 1848. Adventist writers in America, some called it a sign. You know, this still wasn't an Adventist church yet. But some people called it a sign. Others refuted it. Others began to time set. Hiram Hedson said, okay, Jesus is coming back in 1850. Joseph Bates said, no, he's coming back in 1851, after Jesus finished 7 years of ministry in the Holy of Holies. It seemed like, and it says, I also found this quote, the age to come doctrine developed hurricane force among Adventists. But old literalism was denounced as Judaism, they'd call it. Today they would call it Zionism. Do you know that they're trying to get a bill passed in the United States that if you speak against Zionism, that can be considered a hate crime? And that means our Adventist writers would be sent to jail. But there's a Democratic Jew in there, and I have the article in here somewhere. I don't have to get the details. But he said, no, not all anti-Zionism is anti-Judaism. We have the most strict group of Orthodox Jews who are against Zionism, who believe it's not of God. So anyway, back to the story here. The Adventist Herald, I'm going to skip ahead here. Oh, here's what the Adventists said. Judaism and Adventism, and when they said Judaism back then, it meant Zionism, the hope of rebuilding and getting Jews back to Israel. Judaism and Zionism, Adventism, are two different things. The former we have been battling from the beginning, and wherever our brethren have embraced it, it has perfectly bewitched them. And all this is found in a document from the Ellen G. White estate called The Gathering of Israel, a historical study of early writings by Julia Nufa. And as time went forward, I don't know, the Balfour Declaration was made in 1917, but before that, in 1915, British promised Hussein, the Sharif of Mecca, Mecca is the most holy place of Islam, that Britain would support an Arab kingdom under his rule in return for his mounting Arab revolt against the Ottoman Empire, who was Germany's ally in the war. And so the Sharif of Mecca assumed that Palestine was promised to him. Now today you'll hear people saying, even Golda Meir said, there's no such thing as Palestine. That's a made-up name. Yeah, it was made up by the Romans 2,000 years ago. Is there such a thing as America? No, that's a made-up name, made up 200 some years ago. So whatever you call a name of a place, whatever, they're called Palestinians. Of course they're not Philistines, which is what their name is in Arabic, Philistia. But they're from that region. They got the name from the Romans, who said, we don't want to call this land Judea. No. Those people are out of here. You know, in 135 AD, that was the last revolt of the Jews against Rome. Poop, you guys are out. Judaism was illegal to practice 120 miles from Jerusalem in any direction. So this is Palestine. Palestina, they had Palestina. They had 3 different regions of Palestine in the Roman Empire. Anyway, back to the story here. So in 1915, Britain promised this land to Hussein, but at the same time, 2 years later, the Balfour Declaration, I'll read it right here on my document. I got the original right here, a picture of it. It says, Dear Lord Rothschild, I have much pleasure in conveying to you on behalf of His Majesty's government the following declaration of sympathy with Jewish Zionist aspirations, which has been submitted to you and approved by the Cabinet. His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. So, of course, after the end of World War I, they just opened up the way, which was 1 year later. They said, okay, you guys can go back home. This is your land. There's one little problem, though. It was, and it says right here, it says in my notes, by the strike of the imperial pen, the promised land became twice promised. Promised to the leader of Saudi Arabia and promised to the Jewish people. This was an extraordinary tale of double dealing and betrayal. One nation promising another nation the land of a third nation. Anyway, and here's what the Adventist response was. Oh, in 1942, Ministry Magazine, 1942. So now we're moving along. As time went on, as the Jews kept coming in, and at first they'd buy the land, and they were establishing some communities in the late 1800s. Around the year 500, there were literally no Jews in the land. But in 1492, when Spain said, okay, if you're not a Muslim, if you're not a Catholic, that means if you're an Arab or a Jew, you have 3 choices. Remember 1492 when Columbus sailed the ocean blue? Well, along with that came 3 choices for Jews and Arabs, Muslims. Convert to Catholicism. Leave or die. So most of those Jews went to the Ottoman Empire, and they lived there very happily, much in peace. And a lot of people started moving west. By the time 1500s came, 1500 AD, they were about 3% of the population of the area of which is now Palestine. And the Christians, Palestinian Christians, were about 4% of the populations. Now in mid-1940s, they had become about the same numbers. And in 1948, Israel said, we're now a nation, and instantly they were at war. They won the war quickly. And in 1942, in Ministry Magazine, this is what it says. Number 5, in the 7-fold errors of dispensationalism, it says, it's called the Return of Jews' Illusion. The illusory hope of the restoration of the Jewish nation at Jerusalem, this was before it happened, is destined to lure millions into the desert of destruction. Now, has there been a lot of destruction going on? They've had so many wars over there. And nowadays, it's really sad. There's so many movements in the United States. One Christian movement brings 1,000 Jews to that area every month. And where do they put them? They put them in Palestinian land. Of course, Jews don't recognize that, but the United Nations says that was Palestinian land. Anyway, so back to the Bible story. Here we have a man who survived Saul's household. I'm going to take you back to Genesis. Where are we? 1 Samuel. I'm sorry, 1 Samuel chapter 14. Let me see. That took a long time to get through that historical stuff. And let's see if I can connect it up with David and Goliath. Jonathan defeats the Philistines. I don't know if you know this story. in verse 43, 1 Samuel 43, says, Saul had told the people, if anybody eats anything, he's going to die. And as his son Jonathan was going on, he found some honey and he stuck his stick in there and he ate it. He hadn't heard what Saul had said. And then Saul said to Jonathan in verse 43, tell me what you've done. And Jonathan told him, I tasted a little honey with the tip of the staff that was in my hand. Here I am, I will die. And Saul said, God, do so to me, and more also. You shall surely die, Jonathan. Anyway, the people spoke up and said, no, he's not going to die. They saved him. So we see that Saul was kind of a very religious man, but he was also a little on the crazy side. And let's move ahead to chapter 17, verse 26. There was a man named Goliath, and David came out to the men and stood by them and said, what shall be done for the man who kills the Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God? So Israel was going through some shame back in those days. Today it is also going through shame. Do you know that the premier minister only has 27% of the support of Israelis? They do not like what's going on today. We're not told that in the news. First, jump ahead to chapter 18. You know the story. David went out to war, and when he came back, the women went out to greet him, and they said, Saul has struck down the thousands, but David has struck down tens of thousands. And then verse 9 says, and the Saul eyed David from that day on. And the next day, a harmful spirit from God rushed upon Saul. We know God is not to blame for a harmful spirit. And he raved in his house. And he says, I will pin David to the wall. But David had evaded him twice. Verse 12 says, Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with him, but had departed from Saul. You know, as time went on, David realized that things weren't going too well. So he got together with Saul's son, Jonathan. And in chapter 20, verse 14, Jonathan made him promise him something. If I am still alive, show me the steadfast love of the Lord, that I may not die. Because back in those days, when you had a new king, the old family was pretty much done away with. And he says, and do not cut off your steadfast love. No, verse 14. And if I'm still, show me the steadfast love of the Lord. Show me the Hesed Yahweh, it says there in Hebrew. Show me the Hesed, that kindness, that dedication, that passion for your neighbor. And do not cut off your steadfast love from my household forever. Well, eventually David took the throne, and that takes us into 2 Samuel. And one day he's reviewing the situation, and he says, is there anyone left in the house of Saul that I may show kindness for Jonathan's sake? And yeah, they found this man named Mephibosheth, and his name means the destroyer of the idols, the destroyer of shame. That's what an idol was called. How many times did Saul cause shame to Jonathan through his life? Seems like quite a bit. And as King David sent and brought him from the house of Mashir and the son of Ameliel at Lodabar, verse 6 says, and Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, son of Saul, came to David, fell on his face, paid him homage. And what was he expected, do you think? Maybe a sword coming down on his neck? And David said, Mephibosheth. And he answered, behold, I am your servant. And David said, do not fear. So in our world today, always, throughout the human tradition, there's a problem of fear. We have a problem of fear, a problem of shame, a problem of rejection. According to Brene Brown, shame is the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. It is the fear of disconnection. And people who go through shame and rejection and trauma tend to pass it on. In the United States, you know which group of people is probably one of the strongest about disciplining their children? Harsh discipline. Have any of you ever get a belt across the backside? How about a 2x4? Anybody get a 2x4? I got a 2x4. What did I get that for? Oh, I remember. Yeah, I called my dad a bad name. He was teasing me about my little girlfriend. I was like in 5th grade, and she had broken up with me. And all of a sudden I said a word I don't think I'd ever said before in my life. I won't repeat it here. And in the middle of the circle, all of a sudden I looked on the ground and there was a 2x4 that long. I looked at it. I looked at my dad. He looked at it. And I took off running. And he caught up to me. And I think, well, I didn't use that name on him again. I think that was all right, you know. Sounds pretty harsh. But 2x4, it hurt my hands a little more. He goes, move those hands. It wasn't that bad. It sounds pretty harsh. But African-American parents have told me, Hammen, you white people, you don't know anything about disciplining. So, and Mexican kids tell me, not all, but a lot will tell me, yeah, does your dad hit you? Of course. Where? Donde caiga. Wherever it falls. Wherever it falls. Bam, bam. Mexican moms are known for having the power of the chancleta, means a slipper. They can kick that foot off or kick it off. My friend from Italy was like that. He said he would come home if he was misbehaving or something. That slipper would come flying through the head and hit him right in the face. Vince. Or she'd be hiding behind the door with a broom. And bam, bam, bam. I told you not to go play soccer today. Now, what happens to a person that is raised that way? Or here's another question. Why are African Americans, why might they seem to have more of this tough correction? According to psychologists, it's called transgenerational trauma. Go back, not even that far. The last slave died in around 1972. Imagine that. Last born slave. That was a freedman. And also the last person who was brought over as a slave died around the same time. That is not very long ago. Now, how were they raised? How were they taught? Well, you misbehaved. Guess how they were taught? Lashes, right? And when their kids were growing up, how'd they treat their kids? Oh, I'm not going to let this happen to you. What happened to me? No, it's passed down from one generation to the other. Same thing in Canada. What happened to all those natives that were put in boarding schools? And I listened to one, he is 2 years younger than me. And his first week there, he was abused by a 5-year-old. He was sexually abused by the priest, and the next week by the nun there. And when he spoke his language, which was all he knew, he was kicked on the floor and put in the box for 3 days. The box was a 3x3 by 3 foot room, and he'd come out, and he'd be blinded, and he'd speak, and boom, he'd kicked again. And so what happens to people that are raised that way? This guy's got a tremendous story. When he was 14, he was let out, and he got back to his home, and his grandparents were there. 14 years old, from 5 to 14. That's the love he knew, the love that he was shown in those boarding schools. And his question was, why did you send me to that horrible place? Of course, he was taken out of the hospital. He was basically kidnapped by the government and put in a residential school. This guy's 2 years younger than me. I mean, I don't know if he's had any children, but before they let him in the house, they said, you can't go in the house. We're going to take you to the forest so we can get this out of you. And so they went to the forest, and they said, take off those clothes. and they put a chief's blanket around him. And then they took him out in the woods, and they drew a circle, and they said, you have to stay in the circle until it's time for you to leave. They gave him a feather to keep the circle clean. They gave him a couple of pebbles to put in his mouth to keep his mouth moist. And they gave him a rattle to scare away evil spirits. And he said after a couple of days, he was there for 3-4 days, he said after a couple of days, the trees started talking to him. And they told him that, tried to tell them he was a good person and give him positive attributes, that he had a good hope for his life. And they finally said, you can go now. And as he's walking out of that circle, he looked back, and behind the trees stepped out the chiefs of the village. They stayed out there with him. So when Mephibosheth, whose name means the destroyer of shame, he was never a destroyer of shame, was he? He lived in a poor place. The person who was the destroyer of shame was David, who said, do not fear, for I will show you kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan. And listen to what he says. I will restore to you all the land of Saul, your father, and you shall eat at my table always. So as far as Israel and Palestinians go, there's no hope until the bigger person opens up and makes way for the lesser person and clothes them and says, you're going to eat the way we're going to eat. You're going to be treated fairly. If you when you listen to some of the things that are going on, why does Hamas always come back and do these horrible things when they know 10 times more Palestinians will be killed than the number of Jews they've killed? Because they've lived through trauma. And they lived through trauma in the West Bank. And when the new settlers come, boom, they're put in there. There's a town of Hebron where Isaac and Abraham and Jacob are buried. The building is 2,000 years old. Part of it was built then. And it used to be a bustling center. Now it's been destroyed since these settlers have come back. There's 1,000 Jewish settlers, 180,000 Palestinians. For every settler, there's one soldier to protect them. Now, wouldn't it be nice that'd be a pretty safe place to live. I wouldn't worry about police or crime in my neighborhood if I had 4 policemen standing outside my door every day. It'd be pretty safe. Does it sound like it's very fair? So that the market where it used to be a bustling center is now, nobody goes there because there's too many gates to go through and all this stuff. The more you read about what's going on in the West Bank and you listen to these people, Palestinian Christians, you realize things are not that good over there. And we as Christians, we can also be shame smashers when we stand up for those who have been oppressed. People cry out, Black Lives Matter. Well, yes, of course all lives matter. That's what our response was, right? But, these Hispanic kids, why do they get into the gangs and stuff? And I always said the school has to get into families' homes when the kids are in elementary school. They have to get the kids and the parents, and they got to have the parents involved. This is not Mexico. This is not like Michoacan where you can get your kids run free in the countryside with the horses and all that stuff. This is other world up here. This requires like the government coming together and doing something. Anyway, if you want to hear more about this, you should listen to a man called Stephen Sizer, who did his doctoral dissertation on Christian Zionism and the effects it has had on Palestinian people. You know that 50% of the kids that grow up, 50% of the population of Palestine are kids under 18 years old. And 50% of those people have mental trauma that is not going to go away. Stephen Sizer, his S-I-Z-E-R, The Bible, Israel, and the Church. And they've also produced a movie called With God on Our Side. It's a a movie explaining Christian Zionism and the effects that it has had on that area. This whole movement started with the Christian fundamentalists pushing the nation of England, Great Britain, to do something with Palestine, and they got control of the land in 1848. They said, we're out of here. There's too much problems now. They opened up the can of worms, and now the government that's supporting Israel the most is the United States, of course. But are we making a way for the minority people there to survive? You know, the only difference is like those people are kind of like Mephibosheth, paralyzed, struck by God, counted as worthless. But it's only Christians who can be the shame smasher. Amen.